All right, and welcome to Better Understanding the Bible. I'm your host, Dallas, joined again by Mercy as we keep talking origins. Today, we're going to keep moving into the conversation we've had, going from Genesis 1 up to Genesis 12. And as you can see, we're having nice little skips here with the internet. We've been chatting for a little bit. And hopefully that doesn't wreck the video, but we'll have the conversation regardless. Hopefully it'll be just fine. So thank you for being here, Mercy. I hope you look forward to this topic. As we round out, we're going to finish up to Genesis 12 today.
Yeah, that's going to be really good. I'm really looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So we were just chatting a little bit before we got going here about the patterns. So we're going to do a little bit of a refresher of what we've kind of talked about previously. Then we're going to go into a pattern here, and then some of the details. So last time we talked about Genesis 1 through 8. That was talking about the creation of Adam and his descendants. Genesis 1 was talking about the creation of the head Adam, Genesis 2, and these are the descendants of them. So the body, the head and the head being Adam, the body being his descendants. Genesis 3 then was Adam and Eve's fall, so the head fell. And then in Genesis 4, we get Cain and Abel falling, and then Cain moving into the earth, marrying and bringing murder, and growing the men of renown. So we get this incident of the body falling. So Genesis 1 is the head creation, chapter 2 is the body creation, 3 is the head's fall, Genesis 4 is the body or the descendants fall. So we get that just set up. We went over that. And then we moved into Genesis 5, which was a whole chapter of genealogies to introduce the new coming inheritor, Noah. Then we go into Genesis 6, which is like the book of Revelation for Eden. It was there, God telling them, this is your time, 120 years. So Genesis 6 was like their book of Revelation. Genesis 7 was their 70 AD. It was the end of them, which brought us to Genesis 8. And then that was the end of the first section that we talked about. And in the last video, we got into, okay, now this is the transfer into Noah. And Genesis 8, we saw that this is when Noah came off the boat. He was given dominion. He was put over top of the animals. And this copied Genesis chapter 1. And that's where we're going to keep moving forward, is looking at how the format now, before we get into some of these details, duplicate the actual literary format of Adam. So with Genesis 1, we see Genesis 8. This is where Noah gets the animals. This is where the flood comes to an end. The dry land appears, and he's given dominion over the animals and all that creeps all over the earth. So we see Genesis 1 being played over top of Genesis 8. Now, I remember when I first pointed that out to you, Mercy. Is that hard to see, or is that easy to see after everything we've said?
No, well, since you pointed out, like, yeah, like I'm seeing the pattern, and I can memorize that really good. Maybe for the audience, if they think this way, like 8 is the number of new beginnings. And so here you have Genesis 1 that is correlating with Genesis 8, a new beginning, and you have a new man and a new creation. And we're very familiar with this terminology in the New Testament with Paul: new creature, new creation. And so we're seeing this pattern. I think it's really beautiful to see that. It's fantastic. And so here we are in Genesis 8.
Yeah, like you're saying with Jesus, we see the same kind of. He's given, in Acts 10, the church is given rule over the animals are brought in. Same idea, all this similar language, and this structure should be very interesting to us because we're going to get to see that duplicated. And so with Genesis 1, we see that dominion man, that covenant man, being put over top of them. Well, what then ends up happening in Genesis 9 continues on with the story of the head. And it actually duplicates what we see in Genesis 3. So Genesis 1 and Genesis 3 are telling the story of the creation of the head, and Genesis 3 is the fall of the head. Well, that's what we actually follow suit here in Genesis 8 with Noah, because Genesis 8 is his creation, and Genesis 9 is the fall of Noah. So that's very interesting because we get the same creation of a head and creation of the head's fall. And then
Mhm.
what do we see when we move off into Genesis 10? We get a genealogy. We get an introduction to the body, to the all the descendants. So now that we've heard of the head, Now we've moved into the description of the body, the descendants. So just as we see with Adam, we're seeing duplicated specifically here with Noah. And then what do we see as we move out of Genesis 10? We move into Genesis 11. And what do we see? We see the fall of the descendants, the fall of the body. So just like Adam, Genesis 1 and Genesis 3 is the story of the head's creation and fall. We see that duplicated with Noah in chapter 8 and 9. In chapters Genesis 2 and 4, we see the creation of the body and the fall of the body, just as we see here with Noah in Genesis 10 and Genesis 11. Does that make sense? Does that stand out, or am I going too fast?
No, that's great. That's a great summary because when you look at literary devices, and we see so many literary devices in the Bible, it's not just a random story and we just read it, right? And we normally we look at the chapters and the subtitles and we just go through it and we don't quite know why it's there or why it's not there. And so when we look at this, I sort of have this picture in my mind when you look at like chiasms and how they format the chiasms. It's like a butterfly effect, right? And there's a main point in the middle and then you branch out and then those parallel each other. Well, what I see here is like in my mind, it just kept on popping up. You have the head A1, then you have the head fall, which is B1, and then you repeat it with the body A2, and then the body falling, which is what? B2. And you're constantly seeing what we call a motif or a template, that you use that word a lot. We're seeing actually a template being put on the book of Genesis that I've never been able to see before, but it is definitely there. That's really exciting.
And it's important because we're talking about two specific, so to speak, entities: the head, the ruling people. And we know that's very important because, according to the law system, whatever the head does, the body gets the results of. So, whatever the head does, the body gets the judgment. So, and that's what we see. We see Genesis specifically talk about the head, creation and fall, which then is followed by a body, creation and fall. Well, of course, that's just following the what the head does, the body gets.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting because that's what we see here in Noah. And I like how you're saying like template, the pattern, whatever words we want to use, type, because we all hear in the New Testament the types and the shadows. This is a literary device where the
Yes.
Moses is going out of his way yet again to say, look, this story is duplicating. It's
Mhm.
another Adam. It's another head. It's another body following another head. And what did they do? The same problem. They were given the temple and the vineyard, and it led to the curse and the destruction of the family. It's exactly the same story. And now, interestingly, exactly the same literary style to express it in orders. And we're going to find that uh, very interesting that in chapter 11 we will see, in fact, Genesis chapter 6, chapter 7 also played out in here, and Genesis chapter 5. So if we can, do we want to go any more into that? Did I miss anything before we keep going on?
Um, no, I mean, like we were saying, those literary devices, there's a reason why it was written that way and this way. And there's a structure here, a skeleton, a framework that we're seeing. I think that's really important because, like we were saying of the Suzer and Vassar Treaty, there was a structure in that. There were 5 points and degrees to that. And we have the five Torah. So it fits into that pattern. And here we have in Genesis the way Moses is putting this together. There is that structure, those literary devices, which would have been very common in that era, And like when we think about like how we write here, and like say in college and the essays, there's a format: the introductory paragraph, then you have the body, there's 3 paragraphs there, and then you have the what conclusion paragraph. We have this system in place. This is the same thing of, I believe, what Moses is doing to create this document for what? The legitimacy of Israel.
Absolutely. They would be looking for this. They'd be looking for that duplication.
Mhm.
I think it's a very good point to point out again. This is following a suzerain vassal treaty system. So if this is following a suzerain vassal treaty system, and we're going from one king, I'm gonna skip it out here. Just wait for a second for the feed to catch up. Okay, so if we're going from one king, and we're going, okay, just wait for it. I don't know why all of a sudden. Okay, I told you guys at the start this might be a problem. Seems good now. Okay, so at the beginning, it's the suzerain vassal treaty being created with Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's passing to a generation of his. So it's actually, so of course it's got to be written in the same way. So we've got to think about this. If we're talking about Adam being created in this manner and it passed to Noah, well, it just makes logical sense. He would be described in the same manner. And when we move forward, not only to Israel, but like Mercy had brought up earlier, which we'll be moving forward in the New Testament, we'll see even the same language at their creation. They are the workmanship of God's hand. They were finished. They were created new creed. So that same language, why? Because it's the same covenant passing from person to person. So it's not unlikely. In fact, like Mercy was saying, it is to be expected to have that same format of description. So I think it's a very good point you brought, the SVT, suzerain vassal treaty. We'll get all fancy and we'll go SVT. But so for a quick refresher then, because chapter 11 has a little bit more of a breakdown to see the rest of this fit in there, but Genesis 8 parallels with Genesis 1, which is the creation of the head. Genesis 9 parallels with Genesis 3, which is the fall of the head. Genesis 10 parallels with Genesis 2 with the creation of the body, where it says, these are the descendants of the heavens and the earth. And then in chapter 11, that parallels chapter 4, which is the fall of the body. And so we're going to take a look at that, because as we get into the language here, we'll see how all the same elements pop up. And we'll just take a little bit more detail and see how this passes off. Because when we get down into verse 10, so this is Genesis 11, verse 10, you will see the Genesis chapter 5, where the genealogy passes from Noah to the next head, which is Abram. So that's what we see. So there's the Genesis 5 is if we take a look at its parallel in Genesis 11, starting at verse 10, you'll see the genealogy to the next head.
Mm-hmm.
But we will also find now, when we go into verse 11, we're going to find the rest of the story that we did with Adam. We're going to see God come to see what they're doing, just like he did in Genesis 3 when he came and saw Adam in the garden. He walked in the cool of the breeze. Well, what do we have here? Now, the whole earth had one language and the same words. Now, the whole earth here, just for those who aren't familiar, go ahead back to Genesis 9 very quickly, verse 18. The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed, or filled, depending on which translation you have. Now in Genesis 10:1, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So here comes all the sons of Noah, and they filled all the earth. And we see all the way down at the very last verse 32. These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies in their nations, and from these the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. So this is the head Adam, or the head Noah, who has replaced Adam. And just as Adam had his descendants fill the land, Noah's descendants are filling the land. So it's just duplicating that time period.
Mm-hmm.
So now when we get into Genesis 11, it says, now the whole earth had one language. Well, that whole earth is talking about the lands that Noah's children settled. So that's just, we make that excursion just to bring that context in for us. And where was that? Well, it says in verse 2, and as a people, they migrated from the east, and they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there, which is near in the region of Mesopotamia, Babylonia. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower with its tops into the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed amongst the face of the whole earth. Now that's very interesting. So they knew what the punishment was before it happened: dispersion, exile. So they were under an agreement. They knew what was coming if they broke an agreement. What's also interesting is the agreement itself. So let's take a look here when we take a look at this language, verse 3. And they said, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick and stone and bitumen for mortar. Well, this is actually a very interesting reflection from Genesis 4 now, isn't it? And we said Genesis 11 is a mirror of Genesis 4. Well, what happens in Genesis 4? Cain goes out and becomes a city builder.
That's awesome.
And what do we have here? Genesis 11. And Noah's sons go out and become city builders.
Mm.
And then what do they say? Verse 4, come, let us build ourselves a tower with a top all the way into the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. That's fantastically refreshing, considering we know exactly what it's talking about. That is also a reference to Genesis 4, which is mirroring Genesis 11, in which Genesis 4 talks about what? It says here, let us make a name for ourselves. Well, in Genesis 4, well, let's go just take a quick look back there. And what do we see as a description given to the children of Cain? Well, we're going to take a quick look at, where is it? Verse 20. So Genesis 4, verse 20. How does it describe Cain's children? And Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. He is the father of, he is known, he is renowned for dwelling in tents. Verse 21, his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father. He was known for all those who play the lyre and pipe. So he was known, they were the men of renown of entertainment.
Hollywood.
Exactly. Well, and then on top of that, we go into 22. Zillah bore Tubal-Cain, and he was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. He was the forger of all. He was known for being the head of industry. So here we have Cain, whose children are known to be the heads. They're renowned for being intense. So we're talking about the how do we even get into housing issues? This is the guy of housing. He's known for housing, for the tents, right? And then we have the entertainment. So we have tents and livestock and entertainment. And so we have control over living, food, and even the military, the bronze implements. So these are the men of renown when we go into Genesis 6, when it says, and where is it? Verse 4, and the Nephilim, the fallen ones. Well, who are the fallen ones? It's Adam and Cain. That's the fallen ones. Just like Daddy, we're the sons. And the fallen ones were on the earth in those days. And afterward, when the sons of God, Adam, who was the son of God's son, Cain, married into the land and brought murder, polygamy, and on a base of everyone known, the men of renown. So when the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterwards, and the sons of God came into the daughters of men, these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Why is that a big deal? Because what did we just finish reading about in Genesis 11? Come, let us make a name for ourselves. They're trying to become the men of renown. So they're building cities and becoming the men of renown. We're seeing Genesis 6 duplicate. So this is what? In Genesis 6 and Genesis 4, this is Genesis 11. This is the fall of the body of the descendants, which is duplicating the exact same story of Adam. So what do we see here? So now we see Genesis 6. This is now the fall of Babylon, the fall of Babel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the word the Nephilim, the giants, I don't think people understand why would they use this word. We use it as more of a literary, oh my gosh, they must have been, 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall. We've heard it all on YouTube and different, pastors and teachers teaching on this, that this was like these giant men. No, this language is very ancient. It's very Hebraic, and if we understand the context of, my goodness, we are moving away from hunter gatherer society to the paleo, to the Neolithic time frame. This is the first time where we now have a record of people developing a civilization. This has never happened before. Now it's being recorded. And as this is happening, these are giant, humongous, epic events that are happening in the land of Mesopotamia. And why would they use that word? Because it was epic, it was huge. And when you think about the father of industry and the father of entertainment and of housing, and this is city building, this is what life was at this time, and what life was all around the world too. They were developing civilizations for the first time. And so this name is huge. What are you known for? Oh my gosh, this is big deal. It's not just clanal, it's not just tribal, it is a city, and we need to be known for this. So we are called giants, we are called Nephilim, we are like lifted up to the heavens. So we build up ziggurats and towers, right? And in archaeology, they found hundreds of ziggurats in this locale, in this location, hundreds and hundreds, because
And
this
it,
cosmology.
oh, sorry, no, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, and interestingly, that's what we're reading. Is they're building a tower? Might possibly be a ziggurat because of what you're pointing at is even in context to that language. Sorry, I don't know if you were going there, but my
Yeah,
brain had to.
really focusing on like, why did they use this really archaic word? It's only used like a couple times in the Bible. People are like, oh, it's fanciful. No, it's not. It's real hardcore, real life. But the mentality of like, wow, we've never seen, these bricks and these buildings. Oh my gosh, we have to go back to that time frame and see like what a big wow is, right? And this is what's happening. That's why this language is being used, and we're seeing it now in the Tower of Babel, and that's what they're trying to recreate in Sumer, in Shinar, in Babylon.
And it makes sense too because it's the same fall, right? Like we see that same idea. It's a curse, it's death, that it's the same story. And if this is Moses writing this system, we're seeing the same pattern. Even now we see chapter wise. The content is grouped into specific repetitions now. We're starting to see even the story is repeating. God comes upon the scene next. We are all familiar with the story, so if we go again, look at it, come, let us burn bricks. So they're now out. So they're cast out, right? They fill, they're like, oh no, we're going to get dispersed. We better go and do these things. And so let's make a name for ourselves. Another interesting thing about that is the word name. That's the word in Hebrew, which is Shem. So when we say the word name in English, we're saying the word Shem. Why is that a big deal? Because Shem, when we read down to verse 10, we find out Shem is actually the head of the family. So here they're saying, come and let us make our own Shem. So are they saying, let us make our name for ourselves? Or were they saying, let us make our own leader?
Mm-hmm.
It's both. They were making themselves leader over all the others.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have a picture of what? Genesis 6. The men of the earth spreading out into the earth, intermingling with the men of the earth, marrying in. And what comes? Corruption. And what do we find that comes from this? Well, Verse 5, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men have built. That's just like Genesis 3. Genesis 1 and 2, the temple's completed. Genesis 3, God comes down to check it out. And they hid from him. So, what do we see here? The people are freed onto the land. They go and they build a temple, and God comes down to see it. So, it's another, again, we're just duplicating the same story.
Mm.
And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower when the children of men had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. So now the people have come together in the face of God and refused his commandments to do their own thing. And now that they're one, they don't need God anymore. They're going to go and take the empire of the land for themselves. God can't have that. So what does he do? Well, let's take a look at verse 7. Well, come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. Well, there's a lot of symbolism going into there, but I don't know if we're going to have to get into that at this moment. And verse 8, so the Lord dispersed them from over the face of the earth, and they left off building that city. Now, what's neat about the dispersion, well, we were told there's no more floods in Genesis 9. So we got to bring this into context.
Mm-hmm.
Adam was created, Adam fell, Adam's body was created, Adam's body fell. God brought a flood. God raised up Noah. God said, not going to flood you. God created a new Adam. The new Adam fell. The new Adam's body was created, and the new Adam's body fell. And what did they say? We don't want to be dispersed, because they weren't going to be flooded. So they already knew what was going to replace the flood, which was a dispersion, an exile. So these people disappointed God in the same way that Adam did, and they were, instead of being wiped out in a flood, they were dispersed through the whole land and became exiled. Just as we see with Israel, when they were exiled into Syria and Babylon, and they became intermingled among all the peoples, they were cast out, just as we see here in Genesis with Noah's body. And who's Israel? Well, isn't that the body of Jacob? It's the exact same story. Just as Cain, body of Adam, cast out into the land to wander. So we're seeing this pattern, this repetition. So in Genesis 11, we actually get the rest of that Genesis structure. So just to throw this out there one more time, Genesis 1 is the head of Adam. Genesis 8 is the head of Noah. Genesis 3 is the head falling. Genesis 9 is Noah falling. Genesis 2 is the body of Adam being created. Genesis 10 is the body of Noah being created. Genesis 4 is the fall of Adam's body. And Genesis 11 is the fall of Noah's body. Genesis 5 is the new coming head to replace the old head. Genesis 11, verse 10 and following is the genealogy of the coming head to replace Noah. Then we also see the coming visitation of God to check out the temple, just as he did with Adam, the rejection of the people, and instead of a flood, an exile, but a similar judgment nonetheless. So we see the complete duplication of Genesis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 played out again on the new head Noah, who then what? Did the exact same thing all the way through chapter 8, 9, 10, and 11, where it gets handed off to, and this is where I'm just going to summarize this quickly so we can get into some more details to who. And of course, verse 27, now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, and there we go. Abram, who becomes Abraham. So we go from Shem all the way down to Terah, and Terah fathered his firstborn, Abram, where we get Israel, and the pattern repeating again. So that literary structure and the repeating of the story, why is this a big deal? Because Moses has just walked out of Egypt with all these people and said to them, God chose us to do this. And how did he prove it to them? he wrote this story. And he said there was a guy once who God created this dominion covenant with, and he ruled over the whole land, but he didn't live up to the conditions, and they fell. You guys know all about this. We're all familiar with our land story, but it passed to a guy named Noah, and then the flood, he survived it, but his children, Shem, actually was the father of Abraham, who was our father. And just as the kingdom was given to Adam, the kingdom passed to Noah, the kingdom passed to Abraham, and now the kingdom is passing to us. That's why it's in there, and that's why it's repeating, and that's why that system was there. It wasn't an accident, as Mercy was saying, that these things were laid out in duplication, in type and repetition, recapitulating those types throughout over and over and over again. This was the expression Moses used to prove they were the legitimate successors inheriting the kingdom right of the one and true living God to rule the entire region of that Mesopotamian area.
Mm.
So that's why this is in here, and that's why it's so specific, is because it's saying this guy started it, then it went to this guy, then it went to this guy, then it went to us. So hopefully that kind of pops out there. I don't know, Mercy. I'm skipping over a whole bunch there. I might be I'm cutting in and out, but I might be skipping over a lot of stuff. Are you hearing anything you wanted to throw in there?
Yeah, there are a couple things that I want to really emphasize because I think it really goes over our heads. If we've been in Christianity for a really long time, it's just a new way of looking at things. And one of the emphasis that I want to state here for the audience is this is the same covenant. It's the same covenant that's going through. It's just a different head and a different body through the descendants that are coming. I think this is really, really important for us to remember because we think that, okay, when it's starting anew with Noah, it's a whole different covenant. Well, no, it's the same covenant, but there was that amendment with the new head based on whatever the situation was, whatever the promise was. It wasn't, God tailored it to that generation of whatever he promised. And so what you're seeing is, yes, it's a different headship with a different body because the descendants have gotten further along. You see that, but it's the same covenantal system. That's very
Before
important
you go, sorry to interrupt you because it's just popping into my head again to explain what you're saying to such a degree. Let's jump to Revelation 21, because the new heaven and the new earth had no sea. That was Noah. There was no flood. His covenant didn't include the sea. There was no flood. So we can even see this idea that there was going to be no way to come in and destroy the new heaven and the new earth. And I know that might go over some people's heads, but for those who would understand this, I would hope you see how when we move forward, I'm just waiting for the feed to catch up. There we go. In Revelation 21, there's no sea. Well, in Genesis for Noah, if there's no sea, there's no flood. Where can a flood come if there's no sea? And so the high idea here we have with Noah, he's given the rainbow. There's no more flood coming. Instead, they were dispersed. So the sea was replaced with being an exile.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very interesting picture. Why? Because the writers in the New Testament pick up on this idea of Jesus's kingdom now doesn't have a sea. It's going to be just like the days of Noah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I see what.
So the new kingdom, just like Noah came, he brought them rest. Jesus came and brought Israel rest. How? No curse, no sea, no way to break God's bond, no way to be cast away, no way to be exiled, no way for a flood to come in and wipe you out. Jesus's kingdom was untouchable. They weren't going to get washed out. And we can see early shades of that all the way back with Noah. And of course, we're all familiar with, Jesus saying, and his coming will be just as the days of Noah. And so we can see these parallels. And this is, as Mercy was going to, and this is the idea that popped in my head, is this is covenantal, and it's the same one. It's
Mhm.
not different. And so, like, I just wanted to stress that out. I didn't want to jump in and ruin your point, Mercy. But when you said that, I was like, oh, I got to say that. So sorry.
No, yeah, yeah, no, that's really important. That's why I wanted to sort of pause here and really emphasize that. Another point to give in a little fuller detail of that emphasis is, like I was telling my house church, okay, we have a little bit of information about Adam, but we have a little bit more of Noah. It's giving a little more detail. We go to Abraham, it gives a little more. Why? Because Adam was so far and distant, there was no necessity to give all the definition. I mean, if we're talking about no, Adam and Eve were in the garden, it was a sanctuary. That garden word, it was a sanctuary, but we know that Eden was a city. It could very well be that this is what was happening during their time, but they used different language to describe that time, right? They're building a city, they're in there, right? So what we're seeing is we're just getting more familiar with the story in repetition, recapitulation, and giving it more fuller because now it's a little bit closer to Moses. When we get to Abraham, we have very intimate details of Abraham and Isaac, and then we have Jacob and Esau and Joseph and all of that, because it's as we're getting closer to Moses' time, we're getting more and more fuller information. So by the time we get to Jesus, that's why we have 4 gospels written about Jesus, because at that time it was right there, it was happening in their time, so people are writing about it, right? And now they're used to writing and stuff like that. So that's why we have more and more information as we're going. But that more information, we have to think back and say, oh my gosh, this is probably what was happening there, like the days of Noah. Jesus in that generation, he is referring back to that history, to that history. It's their history. It's how God dealt with them in that particular time. And he's redoing it again, repeating again. This is a structure, this is a template that we're seeing. And it's like, it's just, wow, it's like a flower and it's just budding open. I hope the audience is seeing that, because that's what I see happening here.
And we see it laid out in a specific structure from chapters 1 to 8, and then from 8 to 12 it repeats. And I love how you're saying it. It's the same. We start at, we're going. So Moses is clocked in somewhere around 1500, depending on how we do this, and then we go off of the biblical ages. So Moses is claiming a time period of, so what was it? It's like 3,000 years earlier than him. So we're going back to like 4,000, 4,400 BC. Some will even say even 5,000. So,
Yes.
but so Moses is claiming to go back to a time where Moses, at his time, would have had virtually no information except the legend that continued forward and the data that he would have gotten from that. So, of course, they would add a very little amount. And absolutely, by the time we get to Abraham, like, okay, so think about it. So here's Moses writing it, right? He's talking about this guy from way in the past, and he writes out what he can. Then he expounds, right, about that. So now it's now Noah. He writes out as much as he can about Noah, but they know way more about Abraham. So all of a sudden, this big story of Abraham starts coming in, and it's like, yeah, this is, and nobody argues, nobody disputes that Abraham is the father of Israel. And all of a sudden, now here you have Moses, who's creating Israel, talking about Abraham the father. So now there's way more details, like Mercy said, right? Of course, it's going to be bigger and more detailed.
Mm.
And then what do we get with this? We get into the book of Exodus. Now he's there writing it. He has unlimited access to information. So when he starts his story with Adam, he's handcuffed to the data that was available to them, which, look at where we are. It took 2,000 years and we still don't have, all the complete documents as what we would like to pretend we do.
Mm.
He was living in a time when, did they have documents that could survive any time at that period? So they would have had an extremely very limited access to data. But by the time we get to Exodus, it's the dude walking around doing it. So now he has complete access, unlimited access. And so, of course, all of a sudden now that one event of Adam's creation, which takes 4 chapters, uh, Noah's he takes like 3 chapters. Then you get to Abraham. Whoa, that story breaks off. That's like another 5 or 7 chapters, 10 chapters. Then we get to Jacob. Whoa, look at the size of this story. And then you get to Israel, and it's 4 books.
Mm-hmm.
So it just brings in that reality of why did they give so little about Adam? Because all they needed was to poach his dominion.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they needed to explain about him. Maybe they had more information, but what they wrote about wasn't that. What they wrote about was, how do we show that this kingdom pattern, then this kingdom pattern, and then it came to us, and now we're part of that pattern. Because
And
that's what. Go ahead. Sorry.
and look at the pattern where what he did was, it's I love it because from Adam to Noah, you have 10 generations. From Noah to Abraham, you have 10. We know numbers are very symbolic in their cosmology, very, very symbolic. And 10 is almost like the number 7, where it's perfection and completion, but 10 is divine order. And so Abraham is giving that divine order, of the sectional points to even structure it in that way. And when we go into the New Testament, what are they doing? They structure it in what? 14 generations, 7 plus 7, 14, double perfection, right? When it comes to Jesus's bloodline, right? Because why are they doing that? Because this is a descendancy, a posterity of what? A specific bloodline that has to carry all the way through for this specific covenant people from beginning to end. And this is the age of Adam. This is how it is. The kingdom is passed from the king to the priest to that firstborn son. And this is how it is. And so it is their story, and we're seeing that story, and it's a beautiful story that carries a universal message.
And when we're taking a look at, okay, so now where do we slot in? That, and just let that hang out there for a second. Where do we slot into that? So this brings up the other questions. So we've been talking a lot about, okay, so creation of a head, creation of a body, creation. This isn't about us. This was never about. So this helps with and I just entering my head, this helps with the conversation about humans before Adam. All these the Bible was never trying to talk about that. So that number 10 thing, like, let's think about how significant that is. Was this talking about other people and all this other stuff? Was it the beginning? You have Moses taking people out of Egypt. They're led to a mountain where Moses goes up the mountain, he comes down the mountain, and they're given the 10 commandments. And then each transfers 10 generations. This 10 is not by accident. This is like the greatest moment in the history of the Bible. The 10 commandments are being handed out. Israel's about to receive the covenant, which passed from Adam from 10 to Noah, from Shem to Abraham by 10, which landed on Israel, and they got 10 commandments. So there's not this again, it's not an accident. And so when we look at that, where in this conversation does Moses' mind turn to people outside of Israel? It no longer logically makes sense why he would even bring it up.
No. The whole nature of this Suzerain-Vassal Treaty, if we understand that, it was only through that specific people group and that bloodline. And why am I emphasizing that is because, yes, as Christians, we read ourselves into the text all the time. I get it. It's very easy to do. Not only have we been taught to do this, it's just been how it's been presented to us from the get-go. So we don't know any other way to do it. It's just very natural, to think about it the way we're presenting it to you in the audience is very counterintuitive, but it is biblical. We want to know what the Bible is saying. We don't want to go through a Christian denomination or an indoctrination palette to understand the Bible. That's what we're trying to all deconstruct out of. So when we look at the Bible in that way, what is it showing? My gosh, what I see in the Bible is like, my goodness, how faithful is God in this covenant? He is so true. And how merciful was he? I mean, for what, 1400 years, he doesn't do anything. I mean, and he's still constantly like working with them. Oh my goodness. This shows something of the nature of God and his character. And so, yeah, the whole basis of the covenant is he has to be true to this bloodline. He has to be true. And he made a promise, I will do it. I will raise up a son from the bloodline of David, and it will be from the tribe of Judah. He will be the lamb of the tribe of Judah. And that was Jesus, and that was fulfilled. Like, I want people to see the significance of how, from the beginning to the end, God was faithful and he finished that and it was true to this group of people. Of course, we can learn something from that. Why is that not good enough?
And we see the duplicating of that on the micro and the macro within Adam. So, like, the start started with Adam and it ended with the last Adam, and we see their interactions taking place. And what's interesting is now that we can see, and I love how Paul says this directly. He said, "For now God is manifest apart from the law. God's character has been revealed apart from the law." What does that mean? So if I say it like this, if I say, "Don't jump on my couch," that's a law. Don't jump on my couch. The problem with that is you will never know anything about me by living by that law. You will only ever know, don't jump on the couch. So the problem is the covenant agreement doesn't reveal God's character. It doesn't reveal who God is. It just tells you not to jump on the couch. So what became more important to the New Testament view was, where was God's character? Who is God? Not what does God require? And that's big for us. Why? Because we see this all the way back to the beginning with the story of Adam. Adam was created in a world with agricultural sacrifice, economic sacrifice, all the way up to human sacrifice. Everything was a sacrifice. What can I give and what can I do to get a God to take some kind of interest in me?
Mhm.
And what do we see when this transcribes, when we finally go from Adam to Noah to Abraham, and the promise to Abraham finally gets his child? Then what is he told? Go sacrifice him. It's, if you know the story, that's very counterintuitive to the story, because he worked like a dog to get that child born. But he takes him to this mountain, and God delivers him from the need to sacrifice his son. So if we realize that from Genesis 1 to Genesis 12, God's character was already overriding the law system, the religion, the culture, everything. Why? His first act was to get rid of human sacrifice. That would have been so foreign to those people. Whoa, that can't be a real God. How can that be a real God? He doesn't want a human sacrifice? That's greatest. So to them, that was very, very against the way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all stuck in a really bad position there, so I'll let it catch up. But we bring that culture in, right? And so the importance, what are we seeing when this is happening? Are we looking at God's character being described and portrayed? Because it's always outside of the law. If we want to know God, we can't do it through covenant. The covenant has to come to an end. Otherwise, we're just trying to get God's attention by throwing the right virgin into the right volcano. But the first act he did was to get rid of that. So why do we think our tithe will be thrown into the volcano will get God's attention? Or if I pray right, or if I follow Jesus right, or if I do this or that or this, why do we think what we do matters to God's character? It matters to God's law, but is that the relationship you want? Because it seems like the Bible went out of its way to teach us not to rely on religious duty, but rather simply God's character, which was never revealed in that law. So do we today want to look at the remains of Adam and pick up his burnt dress and put it on? That seems foolish. I would rather look at the remains of Adam and say, thank God for revealing to us his true character, that we can simply trust on him to be with us in whatever manner he chooses. Why? Because of who he is. So it's very important. This started all the way back with Adam, right? Genesis 12, we already see this character of God. That's important. But those covenant details were important to them. So we got to start seeing this is more than just, a story about Israel. This isn't Israel only.
Mm-hmm.
This is a story about a region in which God interacted in a certain period of time with that region. And we, just as when it says in the scripture over and over again, these people were destroyed, and God said, so that all the nations around can take a look upon these people and know that I am God. Well, Adam went through what Adam went through so that all the rest of the world can pick up that book and read it, and we can now know, looking upon his remains, that God is God. And we don't have to worship him the way he did, because Adam didn't do it right. In fact, God had to take him from all that sacrifice all the way up to Jesus to what? To be spirit, just be authentic, to be wherever you are, to be wherever he is, just be spirit and true. That's what he wanted. He took a people from all form of sacrifice to simply trusting in God's character. He removed all of Adam. Do you see why Adam had to end? We can't move into a new Adam. We'd still be under that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, right? And even though this is a covenantal story, it is really a Semitic story for this group of people, and God fulfilled that. There is a universal message, because this concept of sacrifice, blood sacrifice, animal sacrifice, human sacrifice, when you look at cultural anthropology, at that known time, this was common all over the world. So it was a human consciousness that somehow humanity believed and feared God, that we cannot go to him unless there is a sacrifice that we can give to him. This makes me very sad. But this is how low the human consciousness was at the time. And even though it's just the Bible is just a story about them, but universally it was, everybody was believing in that concept, right? Even today in cultural anthropology, there are still societies today that still do this, because they haven't received a higher consciousness understanding of who God is, right? So that's why this universal message is, oh my gosh, if we have wisdom and discernment to see what is being portrayed here in a historical fashion with these people, we can then look at that and have a lesson like, we never want to repeat this again. We don't want to repeat it. And I have a saying where 90% of the Bible is there to show you what not to do. Not what to do, but what not to do. So we don't want to repeat that. We want to learn from it.
And now, just because it's a universal message doesn't mean it's universalism. Because the picture of the Bible, what is it telling us? It's telling us, what does God want out of us? And that's what's very important. Why? Because what did he want out of Adam? What did he want out of these people? What did his character, not the law, what did his character want? What did he love with Abraham, with Moses? They were his friend. What did Jesus say was going to be the cause for rejection? He said, not everybody who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. I will say, depart from me, I never knew you. That's very important, because that's quoting Jeremiah 31, where it talks about the new covenant, and it says, I will forget all their sins and iniquity, and I will know all, from the least to the greatest. I will know them, because I will forgive them and remember their sin no more. That word know is the same word yada that we find used to describe when Adam yada Eve and produced a son. It means sexual intimacy. Jesus said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the presence of God. Why? Because they don't have an intimate relationship with God. They don't know him. Not they don't know his rules, not they don't know his laws, not that they don't know his obligations. It's they don't know him. God's heart was to take a people that wanted to do things for God to get to know him and turn them into a people who knew God. That's the heart of God. That's the message that we see the smoke rising from the ashes of Adam forever telling us is God doesn't want your burnt offerings. He wants you. So
Amen.
then that doesn't mean everybody wants God.
Correct. Right.
So the message is for everyone, but not everybody will receive it, will walk in it, or even want it.
Mm.
So again, we're just hitting on some, and this is all tailoring back into what? We're all just searching for who is God? How do I get to know God? This is the problem all the way back to Genesis. What did Adam want? To be the head chosen by God. We all want to be with God. Israel wanted to be with God. We all want to be with God. So God said, okay, I'll be with you. Stop putting things in the way.
Do we get to know God, in our time and day? And my number, I'm a, transformation life coach as well as a, house church pastor. And these are the things that we deal with. And it's like, well, let's think of that. And if you're in a relationship with somebody, and you want to know how to relate with them and how to have a good relationship, what do? The number one thing is spend time. And I'm not talking about, oh, Mercy saying, oh, to know God, I need to spend time in church. I need to spend time reading the Bible. I need to spend time in like these prayers and read these prayers. No, I'm saying as you are in your life, wherever you are doing whatever, having the consciousness of God within you, and then just knowing that He is there and spending that time with Him in that reflective time in silence and so however you do, everyone's different, so there is no formula here for folks. It is spending that time and just grounding yourself, and all of a sudden what happens, God does speak to you. And for all of us, it's many, many, many different ways. He is alive, He is well, and I'm telling you, He is crying out for that intimate touch and relationship. That is what He wanted back then, but they couldn't receive it. That's why they had to go through all of this nonsense and ritual to get. We are at a higher consciousness. We don't need to repeat that and do that and go back to a covenant system to do that. No, you get to know God by spend time with Him. Spend time with Him.
That's a big picture of the image. What was the image? That we don't need to bring things. I like how Paul says it, and I quotes off the top of my head. I can't remember. Darn it, I think it's Hosea or whatever. It's you have performed for us all of our works. You have made peace for us. I actually think it's Isaiah now. Anyway, there's this idea that God is the one who is responsible for your relationship. And that should make sense because the Bible's written in a suzerain vassal treaty system in which God is a father and his covenant people are his son. It's God's responsibility to be a good father. It's the son's responsibility to be a good son. It's not the responsibility for the good son to be a good father. We've got to understand that. We don't need to father ourselves. God does.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes into foreign, but I'm going to pick on what Mercy said again. What did Jesus say? Go into the quiet room, go into the closet, go find where nobody knows what you're doing. And when you're there, sit there for a second and remember there's an outside, there's a sky, there's a universe, there's trees, there's oceans, there's mountains. This all came from someone. Like this was put together. That's the creator. The creator put this all together. And in that quiet place, I can simply just say, God of all creation, I want to know you. And you said that you're loving and you will know me if I want to know you. So I want to know you. He will. You're true of heart. That's the whole point. Just like your children, it's not anything different. You know when your children are lying. You know when your children admit when they did something wrong just because they got to get out of that situation versus that heart moment where you connect and you're like, oh my God, this is the relationship.
Mhm.
So let me say it to you like this and then I'll end it. I think I've said it a couple times. God is taking the role of the parent in the anthropomorphism image of being father over a son. Well, then we get this image. We get dad has a baby. At one, the baby does nothing but loves dad. Dad loves the baby. They love each other. Baby's at two, crawling around now. Dad loves the baby. Baby loves dad. Baby at age 3, still crawling around, loves dad, but everything's great. 4, same thing. 5, same thing. 6, same thing. 7, same. Great, loving, awesome relationship. Then something changes at 9. Hey, dad, come here. God gets up, goes into the bedroom. What, son? And he looks down at this great Lego giant fortress. And the kid looks back up at God and goes, there, there. Now will you love me? That's the abomination. That we need to do something. That's the message of the heart of God apart from the law.
Mhm.
So before I shut this down, I didn't think we were going to get up to an hour because we started passing this back and forth here at 40 minutes, but now I feel like we could go on forever. So before I do that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Mercy.
No, I think it's great. I love these conversations. I hope that the people that are watching are grappling with the similar things that we've been grappling with, and to look at the template of Genesis, what was going on here, why was it written that way through Moses, and then to see the patterns that are repeating. I think that's very important because what are we doing? We're trying to get close to the Bible and that message, and what we're seeing is a very clear story of a covenant people and how God dealt with these covenant people, very faithful all the way up to the end. And what was the message? Well, now you can come into the presence of God without any of these things. And that is the beauty of it. If we can get to that point and understand that, then I think we can be freed up to talk about more of like the personal relationship with God, and what does that mean for us today and all of that. But we're trying to get through Genesis to unravel these things.
And I hope these context conversations, like I find them fun. I know Mercy finds them fun. So hopefully you guys listening are finding them fun as well. I know these are at the same time very important, very serious issues. We are talking, internally, at the start of these conversations, there might be a lot of fear. We're talking about our eternal destiny, right? Or eternal salvation, however we want to look at it, depending on our current position. So that is just to second what Mercy's saying. It's with that seriousness that we're taking a look at this because we too are serious about what is this whole thing about, this Bible and this God thing. What is it really actually about? And it's not flippant. It's not here to poo-poo on people and where they're at and say one's better than the other. It's we need to find this out because it's really that important. And hopefully these talks portray that. So fantastic. Thank you again, Mercy, for joining these conversations and being part of the provoking. It's always fun to poke the bear a little, and hopefully these get some more conversations going. Next week, I think Mercy and I have talked already. We might be leaning towards comparing now maybe some New Testament stuff. We start looking maybe going into John and start comparing New Heaven, New Earth language to Old Heaven, Old Earth, seeing some similar language. So hopefully, if you find that interesting, you'll check that out because I actually think that's probably the most fun parts is when we see the New Testament just come to life with all these references to Adam. So thanks again, Mercy, and to everyone out there, wherever you are. I hope this finds you well. God bless.